For grit, I like to say 3D, and it's determination despite difficulties. You just got to keep plugging along, and that was something that I've basically been able to do my whole entire life.
You had to take a terrorist out on a blind date?
It was catfishing before catfishing was a thing. If you do this, you're going to be better than 99% of your peers.
Grit is more than perseverance. It's the fusion of resilience, courage, and dedication that drives extraordinary achievements. Today, we're honored to dive into the incredible journey of Darrell Utt, a former Green Beret whose distinguished military career epitomizes these qualities. Raised in Huntington, West Virginia, Darrell rose to the elite ranks of the Green Beret, leading high-stake missions in some of the world's most hostile environments. His leadership, defined by humility, discipline, and strategic brilliance, earned him numerous accolades, including 5 Bronze Stars. Beyond his operational achievements, Darrell has dedicated himself to mentoring aspiring soldiers, instilling in them values of selfless service and unwavering loyalty. Now retired from the Army, Darrell's inspiring memoir, Grit to Glory, captures the essence of a life forged by commitment and shaped by service, offering invaluable lessons in leadership and resilience. Darrell, we're honored to have you here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's a real honor. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm really excited to get into your story. And as our listeners go ahead and start tracking their walk with the Strava app, I'd love to just dive right into the conversation, because your life, from an upbringing in West Virginia to your extraordinary military career with the Green Berets, embodies grit and determination. Based on your experiences, how do you go about defining what grit is and why it's such a crucial quality for success both in and off the battlefield?
Yeah, for me, for grit, I like to say 3D. 3D equals grit, and it's determination despite difficulties. And it's really the core of how I was brought up in West Virginia, coming from humble beginnings. You know, neither one of my parents graduated high school. They were blue collar. You know, most of the people in West Virginia are blue collar, hardworking, patriotic people, and they just get after it, man. And that's the way that I grew up. And of course, I had, you know, sports that touched my life, and then I had hunting and fishing and trapping and all those type of things. So really, I just grew up with that grit. Like it's almost like I was built for, you know, the military, and just had that no quit attitude. And I think a lot of that, you know, the mental strength and that no quit attitude, I got some of that from my mom, because she was very, very mentally tough. She had a rough life and a rough upbringing as well. So yeah, man, all those things just kind of carried over. And then I just was able to refine them more and more. And as I worked my way through the military as a young guy, and then, you know, went through basic training and AIT, and, you know, was a successful infantry guy, and then went to Special Forces assessment and selection, and went to the Q course, all of those things, like I built on that grit and that determination, and not really caving to any of the setbacks. Like that was always part of the process. It was something to be expected, that you're not always going to be the number one guy or the number one gal. You know, there's going to be people above you. You just got to keep plugging along. And that was something that I've basically been able to do my whole entire life. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but grit to me is the 3D. It's determination despite difficulty. And it's just being able to persevere and keep fighting through.
Well, so talk to me a little bit about this 3D, determination despite difficulties, because, I mean, I have close ties to West Virginia. I didn't grow up there, but my mom has lived there for the last 15 years. She's in the eastern part of the state. We've spoken to a few guests, and then one of my former groomsmen was also from West Virginia. And he had come out of West Virginia kind of during the time of the opioid rise and stuff like that after getting out of the military. But to join the military, he had a lot of different motivations. It was when he went back that he really started to struggle. So what was it that shaped your desire to join the military in the first place?
Yeah, so I would probably say it went back to humble beginnings, which is a very nice way to say that I grew up poor. And I didn't have a lot of opportunities. Wasn't really that great of a student. You know, I was a guy that, you know, just got by. You know, you had to have a 2.0 to play sports. So, you know, I was just a guy that kind of got by in high school. And My father was telling me when I was growing up that no one in our family had ever joined the Marine Corps. So that really intrigued me because I was like, oh man, this could be me. I could be the first guy. I could, you've heard people say, like, hey, so and so is the first person that graduated from college from their whole family. And that's a big deal. Well, just like that might inspire people, when my dad said no one had ever been in the Marine Corps, that inspired me, that intrigued me. And I think that's when I first started thinking about it. And then I was very fortunate in high school, Danny, because I had a football coach that was a National Guard Special Forces Sergeant Major. So between my dad and my football coach, they kind of helped guide me. And my football coach, knowing my background, knowing that I was poor, knowing that I probably wasn't ready for college, wasn't mature enough, and he knew that I was a great fit for the military. So between those two mentors, my dad and my football coach, they kind of helped guide me. And then, I graduated high school in June of 1990. And July, the next month, I was down in Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training to be an infantry guy. So a little bit of, factors from, growing up and, not really having the money or the ability to do certain things. And the military just seemed like a great path for me. And looking back, it was almost like, man, I was built for the military. I was a guy that was definitely built for the military.
One of the things that I've absolutely loved about the time in the military was the amount of direction and stability that it kind of gave you, and the tremendous amount of opportunities that are available for you. And from what I know about your story, the little bit of background that I do know is that you were able to screen for the special forces and even get selected as a Green Beret. What was that process like for you?
I was an infantry guy for about 6 years. So, I really had some good experience in the regular army as an infantry guy. I had a really good base. I was in leadership positions, basically the whole time. I started out as a team leader and, got promoted to Sergeant E5. And when I eventually went to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, that was 1996. And I was an E6. So I had a really good, solid background. But, it was something that I wanted to take that next step. I felt like, the special forces, working in the small teams, like that was just right up my alley. And I thought I had that great base and I was in good shape. I was solid. I could take a lot of punishment. So I felt like, it was my opportunity. I wasn't getting any younger. So I really took it was a big leap of faith. And, you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself to go down that route. Once I got to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and you get to see all of the other people that are there that are trying to make it through Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and I felt like I had some imposter syndrome, and my confidence kind of got hit a little bit because I'm looking around and 300 some people, and there's like a group of young, thin, 150-pound dudes that are like gazelles, and they could run super fast. And I was like, okay, I'm not that. And then there's a group over here that are like 6'4" and they look like they belong in the NFL. And I'm like, okay, I'm definitely not that dude or that group of dudes. I'm just like a normal average guy. Like, can I do this? Like, these guys look like, they're beasts. They're very good. They're strong. They're fast. Like, you get to that point where everybody's super talented. But what I learned, Danny, was, it's really hard to judge what people have inside here and what people have
Mm-hmm.
inside their heart. And, I felt like I had such a strong why and a purpose for why I was there. And you start talking to some of the other guys and you realize that maybe their why or their purpose isn't that strong. And those guys don't really last that long in Special Forces Assessment and Selection because I'll give you an example. If you're a guy that thinks wearing a Green Beret looks cool, or you want to wear Oakley sunglasses, or you want to grow a beard out, in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, or you're trying to impress some girl back home, if that's why you want to do it, it's not going to work for you because they're going to strip you all the way down mentally and physically, and you're going to have blister after blister on your feet. And then you still got to go another 25 miles. And if you're not there for the right reason, then it's real easy to throw in the towel and say, maybe that girl back home will still like me. If I don't have a Green Beret, maybe I'll just wear a regular, cap or whatever. But, the guys that don't have a really strong why or purpose, they don't tend to last that long. And a lot of those guys that look like NFL football players and a lot of those gazelles, they started disappearing, as I worked my way through selection. They typically left in the middle of the night when people were sleeping, and you woke up in the morning and they were gone. And that part really helped drive me too, because, going back to that imposter syndrome, it's like, man, do I really belong here? Can I do this? And like my mindset was like, hey, I'm not going to quit. They're going to have to drag me out of this place. There's no way I'm quitting. It's just not going to happen. So a lot of guys didn't have that, and they didn't last very long.
I love talking to gentlemen like yourself because, when I talk to other people about these difficult selection processes, especially the ones that have to do with the physical realms, I have a hard time relating. I may do things that seem hard to some people, like I'll run marathons and Spartan races and stuff like that, but I'll do it for me. It's a personal journey that I'm on. I'm not getting pushed. I'm not getting forced to, but there was a time in my military career where I came up the ranks pretty quickly and had an opportunity to go to a school for a year. And when we started our class, we started with 20 people. And within the first 2 months, we were down to 5. And it was one of the most terrifying intellectual schools that I had to go to. And I felt underqualified when I went there. I hadn't been a corpsman for that long. I hadn't been in the service for that long, but I had leaders that believed in me. And I was like, okay, my why became to prove my leadership right. Like I can do what they think I can do because they said I could do it. What was your why?
For me, like my why and purpose, I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. And I realized that, growing up from a really small, there were 70 kids in my high school class. And, I played football my whole entire life. So I was always part of a team, a small, really close, tight knit team. And I kind of missed that. I missed that really tight team. And then I started thinking, I was 21 years old, Danny, when Mogadishu, Somalia happened. And I watched that on the news like a lot of people. I'm basically a young kid. I'm a very young kid, and I have 2 or 3 years in the Army. And I'm watching on CNN, what's going on in Mogadishu, Somalia. And I was just like, who are these guys? The Army Rangers, the Air Force Combat Controllers, Delta Force. It's like, who are these guys? And look at what, like Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shugart, both Delta Force snipers. They're the ones that went in and sacrificed their life to save Michael Durant, the pilot from 160th. And that just was like, it kind of like started something in me. It's like, well, who are these guys, and how did they get to this level? And it was like, it was a shock to me that it was like, man, these guys are like the top tier guys. And that kind of started something in my brain. And then I ended up at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and that's where 5th Special Forces Group is. So I got to see them train and all of those things. So it was kind of like a combination. Sorry that it's such a long-winded answer, but it was a combination of all these events that like happened. And it was like, you know what? Mogadishu, Somalia was almost like, it happened like this, and then we moved on. But I started thinking like, man, I was in basic training for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I was a 21-year-old kid when Mogadishu, Somalia happened. I was just an infantry guy. But all of these things I started thinking about these things, like as I had more experience, as I got a little bit more mature, I had a little bit more rank. I was like, hey, if something does happen, does it make sense for me to stay where I'm at and be an infantry guy and be part of this big, huge, war machine? Or would I rather be part of a tight knit team that is very skilled, very professional, the top tier guys and gals? And that like really appealed to me. It made a lot of sense to me. And I think that was a big part of my why and my purpose. It was not to impress anybody. It was not to wear a Green Beret. And one of the favorite things I've heard from a guy, to me, he's an influencer. His name's Nick Lavery. He's a Green Beret. He's still active duty. He's an amputee. His leg was shot off in Afghanistan and almost died. And if you know Nick Lavery, if you've ever seen him, he's a beast of a man. Like he's that NFL linebacker looking dude. One of the guys that made it through selection. But Nick has said, this is his saying, I can't claim it for mine, but it's like, guys put blood, sweat, and tears into going through special force assessment selection. They put it all on the line for a year to go through the special forces qualification course, sometimes more if it's 18 Delta, if it's a medic. And then they go through all these things to earn this Green Beret. But once they earn the Green Beret, they spend the rest of their time trying not to ever wear the Green Beret because it's really not that comfortable of a piece of headgear. It's not like it doesn't block the sun out of your eyes, and it's kind of hot when you wear it. It's hot on your head. So it's just kind of funny that guys just sacrifice everything to earn that Green Beret. And then the rest of their career, they try to like not wear it. It just kind of makes me laugh when I heard him say that. But that was definitely not a reason, that didn't even enter my mind, is that kind of like trivial, aesthetic, superficial type stuff. Like I felt my why and my purpose was a lot more, like from my heart and my desire and, being professional, tight knit team, wanted, survive in combat and be with dudes that I know I can trust.
After going through all of that gruelingness to earn that Green Beret that you just never wanted to wear in uniform, would you make those sacrifices again? Was the why worth it?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely, and that's something, Danny, that I think we're probably going to get to at some point. But you know, I couldn't imagine my life if I didn't serve in the military. And I hear a lot of folks that are my age that went through Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're like, man, after we pulled out of Afghanistan or whatever, it's like, hey, I wouldn't want my son to serve. And it's like, I don't feel that way. I feel that I got so much from the Army, and I have so much gratitude, and I'm so thankful because, like I said, I was this 18-year-old kid that didn't have much at all. And then I joined the Army. I had this 26 and a half year career. I got to do these amazing things. I got to, once I hit that maturity and I started, getting my senses about me, I was able to get my bachelor's degree. I was able to get my master's degree, all while I was in the service. So the military was something that was very good for me. And, I was recruiting. Actually, I was recruiting a guy yesterday that was helping me, get ready to go back and do my back injections. And he was a guy that was yes sir, no sir. He was a younger, in shape dude. And I was like, man, you should think about joining the military. And I typically hit the kids up when I'm going through Chick-fil-A, because those are some good kids over there. And every now and then I'll be like, hey, have you ever thought about joining the military? Maybe you'd be a perfect option 40, Ranger Regiment guy in the Army. And then they kind of look at me and they're like, really? You think so? And it's like, oh yeah, man, you should check it out, option 40. So I'm not one of those guys that tries to discourage anyone from the military. I think the military service is great. I will recommend or say something, but I won't push it too hard. Even my son joined. I'm so proud of him. He's doing great. He's been in 6 years or whatever, but it was something I didn't push for. I really didn't expect it, because he went and did 4 years of college, got his bachelor's degree, and then the next thing I know, he said that he wanted to join the Army, and I was like, oh wow. Congratulations. But I think the military service is good, man. There's a lot of good there. And I think our country needs some really good, folks to continue serving. And I think we need to have a good message as veterans to encourage the next generation.
I 100% agree. I mean, it's a great opportunity when it's presented to you with the right mindset. Kind of like yourself, growing up super Um, humble, as you say, humble beginnings. Went to 5 different high schools, not because we moved around a lot, but because we got evicted a lot. Those were our options, right?
Yeah. See, you lived through it too, man.
And that's the thing is, when you grow up in poverty, you also grow up with a lot of different traumas too. But while I was in talking with friends, you wouldn't have known about their backgrounds, right? You wouldn't have known that they came from poor beginnings. You wouldn't have known that they, suffered different sorts of abuses or different sorts of traumas. But after we get out and we actually start dealing with the stuff, especially Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, talking about our issues, I've come to discover a lot of us have a very similar backgrounds, especially stemming from like childhood trauma. And it's really high from what I've noticed amongst like special operators, people that are driven to a higher sense of service. How do you think that these backgrounds influence, our drives to protect others and serve our community in a higher way?
I think it's a great question. I think it's fascinating to look at. And I was talking to someone else about this, and they kind of clued me in. So I'm going to plagiarize their answer because I wasn't smart enough to come up with this. But it was their theory. The person I was talking to was like, there are a lot of guys that are, special operators that had some kind of childhood trauma, whether it was abuse, like sexual abuse, or uh, just regular abuse. They grew up in poverty. I mean, all of these different things. And it was almost like they've been built with that resilience, built with that grit from the get go because of the things that they had to go through. And then as these folks grew up and they were able to mature and grow up and eventually into men, and then it was like they had something inside them that they wanted to be protectors. They wanted to protect because they didn't have someone that was protecting them when they were growing up as a child. So that was kind of the theory, like, hey, I think that's why special forces just like attracts these type of people that have this resilience and they want to be protectors and they want to help, and it's just like a natural fit. And it does kind of make a lot of sense to me in a way. I'm not a psychologist and I'm not smart enough to kind of dig into all of that, but it really does on the surface. It makes a lot of sense that, as a child, it's like, hey, no one was there for me to help me. I was kind of all by myself there and I had to deal with it. But now that I'm a man and I'm grown and I'm more physical and smarter, I want to make sure that doesn't happen to someone else. It makes a lot of sense, man.
Absolutely does. I mean, I feel like we can, especially if that energy is geared in a positive direction, because some people join and they look back at their trauma and they go, oh well, it's only gotten worse. Nobody's here to look out for me. And I don't know, when I sit there and I think about the ways of the world, I don't look at it as other people's responsibility to look out for me, but I do see it as my responsibility to be the best version of myself that I can be in order to be of service of other people. But I mean that came with years of service in the military, years of therapy, and talking with doctors about why do I react certain ways in certain situations, because I'm still constantly looking for future growth, looking to work out some of my hard edges. And I can only imagine, 27 years of service, 10 deployment. There's definitely moments in your career that have to kind of stand out in your life that shape who you are. Would you mind sharing a few of those? For me, it's not just the deployments, it's the people.
For sure. And something that was very therapeutic for me, Danny, that I didn't realize. I mean, well, there's a couple things I didn't realize with, the process of writing the book. The book is Grit to Glory, a Green Beret's journey from West Virginia to the streets of Baghdad. And first of all, I didn't realize how tough it was going to be to write a book. Like, it sounds kind of simple. It's like, oh, you just write some stuff down, but man, it's a tough, grueling process. And to kind of speak to what you just mentioned there, in my 2006, like, Grit to Glory is based off, of course, I talk about my childhood and growing up in West Virginia, but the majority of the book is based around a January to August 2006 rotation to Baghdad, Iraq. And I was a Special Forces team sergeant. And what is like, Well, what's extraordinary about January to August 2006? Like, there was tons of people in Baghdad, Iraq, and there was tons of people in Iraq, all during the years. Yeah, yeah. What's significant about that time frame, and I remember it like it was yesterday. So we were there January to August 2006. Well, February 22nd, Al Qaeda bombed a Shia mosque in Samarra, and it ignited a full blown civil war. Iraq was already dangerous. It was very chaotic. It was very violent. Everyone in that country hated Americans, and wanted to kill Americans. But on February 22nd, it got ramped up times 100. And we just happened to be one of the special forces teams that was at ground zero when this happened. So it's a significant date. And here's why. Uh, because it did ignite the Civil War. But there was just so much killing, Sunni killing Shia, Shia killing Sunni. One of our Iraqi workers was murdered in the town that we worked in, Adamiyah. Adamiyah is a suburb of Baghdad. So on this particular day, they had the body in a makeshift morgue. And because our guy was a Shia, the Sunni folks at the hospital didn't want to give the body back to the family. So we had to intervene. And we went over there, and I basically went into this makeshift morgue to try to find our guy, our Iraqi guy. And I was with, one of our other Iraqis. But I walked down into this makeshift morgue with, 150 so bodies, deceased, obviously. And it was the worst of humanity. To me, that was like the worst of humanity, because it wasn't like fighting age males didn't care. Like, I was used to that. It was no big deal, but this was a whole different thing. Yeah, there were males there too, but there were females and kids and things like that. And it was just the worst of humanity. And as soon as I walked out of there, once we found our guy and we got him out, I buried that and compartmentalized that so far down. And that was it, man. I never talked about it. I never dealt with it. I just buried it. I just compartmentalized it and didn't say anything. But it always kind of like was there. I never forgot it. And it was just something that I kind of just dealt with. And it wasn't until I was working with Lauren and Gowdy, who is my very talented co-author for Grit to Glory. And, we're talking about this story. And she said, "Hey, Darrell, like, you have some really good stories, and I'm getting the meat of the story. Like, I understand the meat, you guys went and did this and you captured this guy, or you were in a firefight and, this happened. This is the day that you visited a morgue. Like, I understand that, but I need you to like really tell me. I need to feel it. Like, what did it smell like? What did you hear? What did you see?" But she was being very delicate about it because she knew it was something that was sensitive to me. And we were able to work through that. And once I unpackaged it and I was able to share with her and express, the emotions and all of those things, it was actually very therapeutic, and it kind of released, like, it like made me realize, it was like, hey man, that wasn't me that did that to all those people. I was there trying to prevent that from happening to those people. It shouldn't be something that I just buried and I'm ashamed of, or, you know, I did everything that I could, and I was actually there for a very good cause to help recover one of our guys, which I did. But it was just something that I witnessed, the carnage of war, the worst of humanity. And I just kind of had to deal with that and work my way through it. And luckily, Lauren served as not only my author, as my confidant, as my buddy, as my therapist, because once we started talking about it, and it just really helped me, like, hey, that's not something that I should have just buried and compartmentalized. Like, it happened and it sucked, but I and my team, like, we did everything that we could. We did our best. That's war, man. That's the carnage of war. So, yeah, it's a long-winded answer, and I apologize, but unpacking some of that trauma and some of those things that you see, and I compare it to, Danny. Have you ever heard, like, maybe on the news, or you've listened to a program or something, and it's like, this is Detective so and so. He's been a homicide detective for 30 years, and he's in New Orleans or whatever. And it's like, this is the worst murder scene that he's ever seen. And there was like a family of 6 or 5 people were over here, and it was a murder suicide or whatever. And I remember hearing that and thinking to myself, like, I dealt with that like times 100, in one incident. And I'm not trying to like compare or lessen, because I know that's very traumatic. Like, I don't know how law enforcement, I couldn't do that job. They have to deal with this stuff all of the time. And, like kids in
Yeah.
car accidents and things like that. That's terrible, man. That's terrible. But just to me, like, it just kind of made me think, like, man, for someone that dealt with it for 30 years and then they see like this worst crime scene, it's like, well, I had that times 100, you know?
Yeah, no, I do know, and I'm gonna interject here. You never have to apologize for telling your story. Like, you're always going to get the respect and space, at least on this podcast, to share what you need to share. As you're sitting there recounting this, I'm like, yeah, I was in Iraq. I was part of a MIT team, small unit guys embedded in the Iraqi army from January to August of 2006.
Oh, really?
Yep, right up in Al Assad, around Baghdadi, um,
Yeah.
just west of Ramadi, northwest of Ramadi, at Haditha Dam,
Wow.
shortly after the massacre. And so our unit relieved that unit as a small team, and I remember the operations, and I remember the Iraqi on Iraqi combat that was occurring on a near daily basis.
How crazy is it that we were in Iraq at the same time, man? Just different parts, but I mean, I know exactly that time period, and now that I know you experienced that same time period too, because I know the national media was trying to downplay it because they didn't want the news to be so bleak and so negative. And they were like, I think they were calling it, Danny, if you remember this, they were calling it sectarian violence. And it was like, no, man, it was a full blown civil war. But sorry, I want you to go ahead. I just think it's so neat that we were there at the same time.
It's absolutely wild. I think you're the second person in a month that I spoke to that was in Iraq, in that area, that knew the environment. And you're right. Like, it was very downplayed. When I showed up, I was 21 years old, just turned 21. I had to turn 20. No, I turned 22. I turned 21 in Afghanistan. But anyways, I digress. And I was telling my family, I was like, oh no, I'm going to have a very like relaxed. I'm there to train the Iraqi army. There's not a lot of kinetic energy going on from what I'm being told. And then as soon as we arrived to the moment that we left, it was IEDs daily. It was a lot of that stuff. And when I came back, I didn't know how to talk about it, so I compartmentalized it. I fell in love with my job. I fell in love to serving along a small team of people and training people and making sure that they knew how to get casualties off the battlefield so that they could live. Because I was blessed to never have a patient pass. And I don't know how that was possible in that environment. But, it took me 5 years to start sharing about my journey. And the reason why I go down this road is because, you talked about this book and sharing it. It's not that the emotions, at least for me, go away, but it doesn't hurt. I've learned how to talk about it. How has writing this book helped you in kind of deconflicting a lot of that stuff that we compartmentalized?
Yeah, going back to being very therapeutic. And I was talking to some other guys about this. I was talking to Ryan Fugit. He's a good friend of mine, and he's the one that runs the podcast Combat Story. Um, very successful guy. And I was sharing with him, the therapeutic part in the book and stuff like that. And then I got to the section where it was like, my wife wasn't with me during all of the things that like we weren't married. We've been together for like 5 years. We've been married 5 years now. So, she was past all of my military stuff. I was a civilian, and she doesn't know a lot of the stories. And when I got done with the manuscript, when Lauren and I got done, and she was one of the first people to read the manuscript because she's my partner, she's my wife. Uh, obviously the finances, the investment that went into this. And that was like another relief off of me, that she got to share and read some of these stories and kind of know what I went through. And I mean, she's a very good woman and she shows me a lot of grace. But I do think part of it is maybe once she read my story and she's reading it in black and white, the things that I've went through, the things that I've seen. I think maybe she can show me a little bit more grace if maybe one day I'm a little bit more quieter than another day, or maybe I'm a little bit short one day, or it's like, man, you're so quiet today, or you're a little fired up today. Like, I think she kind of shows me a little bit of grace, and lets me work through some things. But it was a relief to be able to share my story with her. And when I was talking to Ryan about it, he's like, isn't that something, like, we should be able to talk to our wife? I mean, they are our life partner,
Hmm.
and you should be able to talk to your spouse about these things, and kind of, so you're not struggling by yourself. And once he said that, and I was like, yeah, that's a great point. I wish that I would have done that earlier, because I think it would have, we have a great relationship. But I think that that might be something for the listeners out there, that might feel like they're struggling. It might be a good idea to sit down and talk to your partner, and let them be able to show you some extra grace and say, hey, I know you're dealing with some trauma and some things like that. What can I do to help you? Or I'm always here if you want to talk to me. There's some things like that they can work through, that I think would be very helpful. So you're not just feeling like you're shouldering it all by yourself. Like, if you have a partner, use your partner.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really amazing PSA. I mean, if I had to compartmentalize my life around the person that I spend the most amount of time with, it would be a very hard life, because like she just wouldn't understand. And oh, you're having a hard time, go figure it out on your own. It's like, yeah, no, my wife partners with me. I'm super curious though, because I want to get this isn't just a book about war and about these stories. You teach some really amazing lessons, but I do want to know about one of the stories that I've heard a rumor about this. You had to take a terrorist out on a blind date. It's like, what am I hearing about this?
Yeah, it was catfishing before catfishing was a thing. I don't even think it was called catfishing back then. But we were handed a target intelligence packet, a tip, from the outgoing Fifth Special Forces Group team. And a target intelligence package, a tip, is basically like, here's a picture of the guy. This is where we think he lives. This is the phone number. These are all the things that he's done. He's killed all these Americans. He's a improvised explosive device guy. Whatever. It's got all of the information. It's kind of like having a warrant for someone, or whatever, like law enforcement. They have all of that information there. They're just waiting to go get the guy. Well, for whatever reason, this dude um, was very elusive, and they weren't able to capture him the whole. I think they tried to get him for like 2 years, and they weren't able to capture him. So, due to all the political stuff that was going on in Iraq, and I'm sure you recall, some of the stuff that was going on there, we had to be very creative, and we didn't have all the assets that, like some of the top tier units had. So we didn't have like our own dedicated helicopter support, or, all the other really cool, sophisticated gear. Um, we had to be kind of like, man, we had to be very creative and innovative. So we started thinking like, hey, if this is a young guy, he's not married. We heard that he was kind of a player, and, he had his little girlfriends all over town and all that stuff. And we thought about it, we strategized about it, and we came up with an idea because nothing else was working. We came up with an idea. It's like, hey, what do you guys think? This is discussion that we're having as a special forces team. It's like, what do you guys think if this was you and some woman called you out of the blue, and you're single and you're a player and you got girlfriends, and a girl calls you out of the blue and she hits like some really X-rated talk right from the get-go? Would that get your attention? And pretty much everybody was like, yeah, that would get my attention. I would at least listen. Like, what's this chick talking about? So it was like, okay, this could possibly work. Or it couldn't work. Maybe he would be like, no, this is too suspicious. But we felt like if he listens and he's intrigued and he's a playboy and he wants to have another girlfriend and he's hearing someone that's really talking X rated, let's see where this goes. So, long story short, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, but we were able to find an Iraqi gal that could talk the talk. And we got him on the phone, and she started out with the X rated talk, and it got his attention. And then it was like, hey, you're not talking to whoever you think you're talking to. And it's like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. So that's kind of how it started. And then as soon as she had that in, they started developing common ground, and then they started talking to each other on the phone. And then that led to like, hey, let's meet up. And we set the whole thing up. I mean, it was definitely catfishing before catfishing was a thing. After a couple of weeks, it was like, hey, they were going to meet like right outside Solder City at like this little clothing store. And of course, she was never in any harm or any danger. And she wasn't in the store, obviously. But he went there to meet her. We thought he was going to go in the store, and we had a whole plan worked up, and we were going to do it. But he was brave enough to be across the street, kind of like perpendicular to the store. And we thought we were going to have a dry hole because, he wasn't in the store. But we were able, like on the third drive by, we were able to see him that was perpendicular to the store. And we were able to capture him right then and there. So that is one of the stories. It's called Honey Trappin' in Grit to Glory. It's a really interesting chapter. A lot of people are fascinated with that story. So it lays it out really well, man. It lays it out really well. You'll have to check it out for yourself. I promise you'll like it.
That's awesome. I love that story, and now I definitely want to read a little bit more of that. That's ingenious, and you guys are ingenious. But I will say, I don't know, aside from being a television producer, how much those skills would translate over into the real world. So, as somebody with 27 years military experience running honey traps in foreign countries, how did you go about transitioning into the civilian world and kind of finding your way? What obstacles did you face? How'd you meet them?
I had a very surprising transition, very shocking transition, actually, because I went from being a U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret, 26 and a half years. And then my first post-military job was at a cultural institution in Washington, D.C., working at the Museum of the Bible. And those are like things that I would have laughed if someone said, hey, probably when you retire, you're going to move up to Washington, D.C., because I've always, not liked Washington, D.C. And definitely would have laughed or just like not even like, dude, I don't even acknowledge what you're saying. If you're trying to say that I'm going to work at a museum, you're crazy. But that was my first post-military job. And it's because a guy that used to work for me got out of the military, and he got hired at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. to be like their global security guy to take care of like trips to Israel and stuff like that. So he was doing that. He was doing the global stuff. And he goes, I need a good guy on the ground to run security, because they were building the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. It was a $550 million project, 430,000 square foot, 1 million visitors a year. It had, the threat was definitely higher in DC to have a Bible museum. So, they had to have robust security. And I was able to go up there and interview and do really well and got the job. So I did that for a couple of years. I did director of security, then director of operations. It was a really simple, easy transition for me. I mean, being used to protecting people and trying to keep ourselves alive, like that's kind of second nature. And we were just doing it on a bigger scale with 1 million people, but we had the assets to do it and we had the money to do it. And then after that, I transitioned and I was a security consultant for a few years. And that brought me to Texas. And as in my capacity as a security consultant, that's kind of like what led me to the work that I did at the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation. Um, they're building a Medal of Honor museum in Arlington, Texas. And I worked there for 2.5 years as the chief of operations, a senior executive. It was, the Museum of the Bible, kind of like part two, on a cheaper scale, smaller scale, but still important work. And I did a lot of the stuff at the construction site, making sure that we stayed on budget and our timeline was straight. And what they hired me to do, I was able to finish it up. And now I've transitioned into promoting my book and starting to do more public speaking and things like that. But so I really kind of had a weird transition is what I'm really trying to say, Danny, is, to go from a Green Beret to working at two museums, it's kind of different. Most guys don't take that route, but I think it is a story for guys and gals to listen to and be like, hey, keep your options open. Don't limit yourself. You probably see this a lot. It's like, hey, I want to be a program manager, or I'm an operations, whatever it is. It's like really basic type stuff, but it's like, hey man, keep your options open. There's a lot of things out there. And people are interested when they know that it's like, man, this person served 10 years in the Army, or 26 years, or they were in infantry, or they were in supply. They have experience. They've dealt with resilience. Um, they've dealt with adversity. They have some good leadership skills. All of those type of things are very attractive on the outside world. So don't limit options because you don't think that you're a match. You got to be able to keep an open mind, and you really got to be able to sell yourself. And that was probably one of my biggest learning points, I would say, for the listeners out there. I had a mentor that helped me, as I was preparing to go out, and she said, Darrell, I get that Green Berets are humble, and that's super cool. Like, I respect you. Like, you're a very humble guy, and that's cool. But you're humble to a point where it's almost self-deprecating, and that's not good. And she said, just follow me here. Like, maybe in your world, it's good to be that humble and kind of downplay what you've done or your skills or your training. Like, maybe that's how you guys do it, and that could be cool. But everybody knows who you are, and they know your reputation. They can look at your uniform and see the schools that you've done and where you've been and all the cool guy stuff. So you really don't need to
Yeah.
advertise that. But Darrell, you're walking out the door and no one's going to know you when you're in a suit and you're interviewing in Washington, D.C. So you need to be able to articulate what you've done and how the things that you've done are going to help this new company and, take them to the next level. So you can't be self-deprecating. You can't be Mr. Humble Guy. You can't be Mr. Gray Guy. You have to be able to talk the talk, and you have to be able to articulate what you bring to the table. And that, like, it was like snap, light bulb moment, went off. So I would say that's a big learning point for those that are getting ready to go through the transition. Is definitely be able to talk about your experiences and what you've done, and how that's going to help the company that you want to work for.
I love that story arc going from the operations into the museums. And one of the things that I see within your transition is that flexibility, that adversity. Like, because we face it in the military, and when we're getting out, I think a misconception is, oh, it's going to be easier. But the truth of the matter is that it's going to be a lot more of the same. But now we don't have a team behind us, so we have to own our role in our team. And when you talk about being able to sell yourself, it's like, yeah, we were all a part of the same operation, but what was my contribution to that operation, right?
Yeah, for sure, man. And so many things though that I learned in the military, I was able to use throughout. That's why I'm so thankful for my time and my experience, and the mentors that I had, the leaders that I had, colleagues that I had. Very thankful, man. Very thankful, because a lot of those things, from a humble kid in West Virginia to becoming a Green Beret and to being in combat in Iraq, and then to transition into to be a senior executive at a $220 million foundation, and now, with the book and speaking, it's been a heck of a journey, man. It's been a heck of a journey, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, I want more people to understand your journey. Could you explain a little bit of what's led you now to go into the public speaking and speaking in or writing your memoir, Grit to Glory?
Yeah, it's funny on the public speaking part though, because I'm actually an introvert by nature, and I've just been that way. But it's funny. I started working at the National Medal of Honor Museum in February of 2022, and being a senior executive, and we have a brand new museum that we're trying to fundraise, and we're trying to advertise and make sure people know that, hey, we're building this museum to honor our Medal of Honor recipients and preserve their legacy, and to share the values that are inherent in the Medal of Honor. We want to share these values with the country. So part of my job was to speak about it. And I remember listening to my CEO boss, who's a very impressive guy, by the way. His name's Chris Cassidy. He's a former, he's a Naval Academy grad. Do you know Chris Cassidy?
Yep. Yeah, we've had him on the show back in 2022 when ground was being broken.
Yeah, yeah, that's when I started working. But well, Chris, he's a very impressive guy. But when I first heard him speak, I was like blown away. I was like, holy cow. And I knew, like, okay, he was an officer in the SEAL teams, and he was a NASA astronaut and all that stuff. But I was just like, man, I was really blown away, and I was impressed. And then as I worked there longer, I learned that he had a coach from NASA, because the astronauts go all over the country and they talk about space and all that stuff. So they work with someone, and they kind of get their pitches down and what they're going to say, and how to present it and all that. So I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then I was able to work with someone and get some of my stuff worked out. And then I started just speaking to all the different community club groups, Daughters of the American Revolution, VFW, American Legion, you name it. I was probably there talking to them about the museum and the recipients and the values, and, hey, we still need to raise money. So I really kind of came out of my shell. I started as a guy that was like, man, I want to be in the back of the room and let Chris Cassidy go up there and do all the engagements. But it was a transition where they kept Chris, as we, continued along, and as we matured as an organization, they started putting Chris toward the higher type meetings with, some high level folks, high level donors, potential donors. And then we started taking up the slack for some of the smaller, events. But that's when I kind of started getting into the speaking and being comfortable in front of people. And I was like, wow, I can do this. And then I actually enjoyed it. I got a chance to talk to some high school kids in Weatherford, Texas. And man, I just had this great experience with these kids, because at the time, I think, I'm pretty sure there was like a lot of protests going on in our country with a lot of the colleges and universities. And it was back early on with with Gaza and Israel and all that stuff, the Palestinians. So there was a lot of, you know, things going on in our country. And in my mind, I was like, man, I wonder what I'm going to get myself into at this high school. Like, how am I going to be perceived? Because, they're going to know that we're all veterans and we're there to talk to them. Um, and I was fortunate enough, because I was with like probably 50 people, 50 other veterans. And there was some very high level veterans, like Vietnam prisoners of war, a couple Medal of Honor recipients. And for whatever reason, they thought I was worthy enough to be one of the guys that would speak to these high school kids with some of these other very distinguished, legendary people. But I got my chance to go up there. And actually, they didn't even tell me I was going to speak. They just kind of called me up there. I was like, oh, boy. But luckily, I was prepared. So I was able to talk to these kids, Danny. But I just felt like, it made my heart feel good because I was able to share something with these kids and try to pass on some lessons. And then afterwards, we did kind of like a meet and greet, and everybody was so polite. There was a lot of yes, sirs, no, sirs, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all you've done. And it's just like, man, it kind of blew me away that these are 16 and 17-year-old kids. Um, so it really made me feel good. And I want to start doing that more. I'm getting ready to go back to Huntington, West Virginia the first week of December. And an Army recruiter from Ashland, Kentucky reached out to me and said, hey, I listened to one of your podcasts. This is the value of podcasts, Danny, because I know sometimes, it's hard to quantify like all of the goodness that comes out of a podcast. Like I know you
Yep.
can quantify your numbers and it's like, hey, I got so many subscribers, or, yesterday we had 200 downloads or whatever. Like I get that. But what I'm talking about is the stuff that you can't quantify, because how many people have listened to your podcast, Danny, and maybe you saved their life because you were talking to another veteran and you shared something with them, either you or the person, the guest, and it was like, maybe I don't need to drink a bottle of Jack Daniels tonight. Maybe I need to do what that guest on Danny's show and say, hey, this is what helped me. I put the bottle down, I put the pills away, and I walked on the treadmill for an hour and it made me feel a lot better. Or, I did this, I did that. So these are the type of things that I think is hard to quantify. Just like this US Army recruiter from Ashland, Kentucky heard me on a podcast. And because, where I live in Huntington, it's like the tri-state, Huntington, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, we're all like right across the river from one another. So he heard that I was a hometown kid. I was from Huntington, which is just across the river from where he's at. And he's like, man, I wonder what the odds are if I reach out to this guy on Instagram that he might be able to come to talk to our high school. And he told me that he said, hey, I'm going to reach out to this guy on Instagram because he heard my Instagram handle and my LinkedIn information on the podcast. He said that he told his wife, he goes, I'm going to reach out to him. I'll probably never hear back from him, but at least I'm going to try. I can say that I gave it a shot. But he reached out to me and I called him pretty much right away. And I said, hey, man, your timing is impeccable because I'm going to be in Ashland, Kentucky on December 5th at a bookstore doing a book event. So if you want me to do something at Boyd County High School or wherever and talk to some kids or some potential recruits, dude, let's do it. And he was just blown away. So I just kind of wanted to give you some props right there, Danny, because it's really hard to quantify. Like you're doing a lot of things that you probably don't even see or you're aware of. That's really tough to quantify, but there's a lot of goodness that comes out of what you're doing, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
I super appreciate that, Darrell. That does mean a lot. It gives me chills because, a lot of what we do as podcasters, especially for a good cause, this isn't necessarily to just strictly entertain. Obviously, we hope our listeners are entertained. We hope that they're engaged. We hope that they're educated. But the primary mission is to help people overcome difficult challenges in their life in a healthy manner, build a healthy community, and get charge of their life again. But we just plant the seeds. We don't get to see the crops. We're truly blessed to be a part of an organization like Reach Across America Radio that plays our podcasts. So we know our audience is quite large, and we get people reaching out. But we have one new Patreon subscriber a couple of weeks ago come on and message us, and she had thanked us so much because she wanted to hear more of the good stuff veterans are doing. Not necessarily, she doesn't need to hear more and more of the struggles and we need to do something because we know people are doing something. You're writing a book, or you've written a book and now you're promoting a book, and you give tools in your book. It's not just a book about entertainment and, hey, here's my war stories. You talk about these principles in that you've identified as the grit code. And that's your tool that you teach people. Could you please take as much or as little time as you want to talk about these principles, because it's the veterans like yourself that's actually doing the work. I just get the fun part of hearing it firsthand and sharing it with a larger audience.
Yeah, funny story about the grit code. So when Lauren and I were writing the book, we got to a certain point and we thought we were in good position. And I was sending the manuscript out to some of my closest mentors and leaders that I had in the military. And I sent a manuscript copy to my former commander, Major Gary. Well, he was a major then. He retired as a lieutenant colonel, but Gary Bloomberg was a special forces commander, great commander, very smart guy, West Pointer. So I sent him the manuscript and I said, "Hey Gary, I'd like for you to take a look through this and tell me what you think." And I kind of didn't hear back from him for a little bit. So I was just dying to hear some kind of feedback, because when you're writing a book, like, that's all you're doing. You're stuck to that book. You read the book. I probably read this book 100 times. It's like your life. It takes over things. So I was so jazzed up to talk to Gary, and I called him and I said, "Hey Gary, can you just give me a little bit, man? I'm dying to know like what you think." Because his opinion really, I valued his opinion. And he said, "Hey, man, I'm going to tell you what I think, but I hope this doesn't, disappoint you. But I'm reading through your book. I'm halfway through your book. It's a good story. It's a good book. And you talk about these things, like some of the things that you say is like control what you can control, or calm breeds calm. Like, you talk about these lessons, and you kind of, in the application, like team sergeant, special forces, military, combat, like, I really wish that you would have talked about it a little bit more." And I got really happy because I was like, "Okay, thank you for the feedback. You just got to keep reading the book." And because where I'm going with this story is, the grit code is the last chapter. And it basically
Mm.
takes all of those principles that I've learned from West Virginia, from the military, Green Beret, combat, civilian, senior executive. It takes all of these principles, these 8 principles, that it's basically a blueprint, Danny, for life. And if you had to summarize, if someone forced me to say, "Hey, Grit to Glory, your book is about 80,000 words, 200 some pages. If you had to describe it in 3 words right now, what would it be?" And I would probably say blueprint for life. Not blueprint for Green Beret, not blueprint for military. It's a blueprint for life. And here's why. There's a lot of the principles in the grit code that are just going to help you navigate through the challenges of life, because as we all know that we have experienced and we've experienced life, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to get punched in the face, or things are going to come crashing down at your feet, whether you don't get that job, you don't get that promotion, you don't get the pay raise, you don't have enough money in your bank account to pay the bills, you and your wife are fighting, your kids don't talk to you, you got kicked out of school. Like, we all face these struggles, we all face this adversity, and you need to be able to have some tools to deal with it. So that's where the grit code comes in. And it basically takes those, it's the 8 principles. And you heard the military application, and then I kind of break it down to where it's like, hey, you can use this as a civilian as well. Because let's take the Green Beret out of the equation. But I think we all know that if you're a small business owner, and say you just want to open up your own plumbing store, or plumbing company, that's going to be hard work. Like, it's going to be a grind, man. It's a lot of work, and you're going to have some ups and downs, and you're going to have some adversity, and to have some tools to kind of help you deal with that. And the things that Gary mentioned, like control what you can control, which is one of the principles of the grit code, that helped me, throughout my whole entire life, because a lot of times we get so worked up over stuff that we have absolutely zero control over. And we have to be able to let some of that stuff go, focus on the stuff that we can control. And there's a great story in the book that I demonstrate this, because I don't want to spoil too much of it, but we had a really rough start to that January '06 rotation, a rough start. And I was worried, man. It took me 15 years to get to that point of my career. I was at the pinnacle of my career, and in a snap of the fingers, it almost went away. And I could have very easily spent a lot of time and heartache, like, oh my gosh, I'm on pins and needles. But I had to just like check myself and say, hey, I can only control what I can control, which is me and my team and how I respond to this. I can control that. I can't control it's already happened. Like I have to deal with it now. It's already happened. So a lot of these things, that's just kind of one little example. Another example, another principle of the grit code that I think is kind of entertaining is eradicate arrogance. And I talk about this, like I was, like having humility and being humble is, man, that's just been beat into me my whole entire life. So one of my principles of the grit code is to eradicate arrogance. And I'm trying not to say like, hey, confidence is great. Like we want people that are confident. We don't want people that are arrogant that think that they know everything and they can't learn anything, because that's not productive and it's not what we're trying to do. We want people confident, yes. And I tell the story on this one, and a lot of people don't know like inside, like, well, what's it like for a brand new special forces guy, Green Beret, fresh out of the course, and he shows up to his very first team? What does that look like? People don't know unless you've been on a special forces team. Um, but in this person's mind, this young Green Beret who's probably really physically fit, very young, on top of the world because he just graduated the course and he's got his Green Beret. He doesn't realize he's showing up to a team full of other Green Berets that aren't impressed with what he did because they've all done it. And they're older, they're more mature, they've been around, they have a lot more experience. So here's what that person typically does when they first show up: they clean bathrooms, they sweep the floor, they mop the hallway, they take the trash out, all those type of things. And I've seen this as a leader. And after a couple of days, these guys are really disappointed because in their mind, they're like, man, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do Green Beret stuff, like whatever that means to them. Like we're going to shoot guns, or we're going to be out on four wheelers, or driving around in gun trucks, or we're going to be looking cool, whatever in their mind they think Green Beret stuff is, but they really do the basics. And after a couple of days, I can typically tell that they're disappointed and they're a little bit, dejected. So I'll pull them off to the side and say, hey man, what's going on? Is everything all right? And it's like, well, all I'm doing is like cleaning stuff. I thought we were going to do like Green Beret stuff. And it's like, if you weren't here right now, one of us would be doing all of this stuff. It's not like we have our own janitorial team that follows us around. Like these are tasks that have to get done, and they are done. We have to do them ourselves. And these are very important things because I'm relying on you to be able to do these things and do them extremely well. Because if I can't count on you to do these things extremely well, how can I count on you to do the things when we're in a very violent, chaotic, dangerous situation and people are trying to kill us or we're trying to kill them? How can I count on you if I can't count on you to do these things? So there's a trust factor that kind of comes into this, and you're joining our team. We need to be able to count on you. So you got to leave that ego off to the side, and you got to humble yourself, and you got to dig in, and you got to start working hard and win over the trust of your teammates. So that's kind of like one of the things that's discussed in the book, and I think it's a great valuable lesson for people to hear. And it's probably similar, Danny, to what you've seen. Like there's some of the skits that go around like the NFL, where the rookies, it's a first round draft pick. He's probably making more money than 75% of the team, as a brand new dude. But that guy has to get donuts, or he has to perform a Michael Jackson song like that dude from Detroit in front of all of his teammates. Like there's a process that people have to go to. And for me, that's a big part of eradicating arrogance.
That's awesome. If you had to pick one, and maybe this will be familiar to your Bible museum which one would you say is the most important principle that you lean on the most?
It's hard. It's hard because there's some really good ones in there. Relentless execution is a big one because I think it's so important for people to be able to execute and not to get political at all, but I think it's fascinating that someone was interviewing former President Obama, and they asked him a question, and they said, Mr. President, what do you think what's a really important thing for you? And you've seen everything. You've been the president for 8 years, and now you're doing all these other things. Like, what's something that's really important for a young person to be able to do, or that really impressed you when you were in the White House, or, you were dealing with all these other people? And he basically said, it is so important for someone that can get stuff done and can execute and can say, hey, Mr. President, this is what I'm working on. I got it. I'm going to knock it out, and I'll let you know how everything goes. Because, he's dealing with problems every single day. People are bringing him stuff. So when he responded with that, I was like, man, that's exactly what relentless execution means to me, is being able to, like, whatever it is that you're supposed to be good at, a Green Beret or a military guy, shoot, move, communicate, stay alive, all that type of stuff. Or you're a salesman, or you're a banker, or, whatever it is that you do, you need to be able to do it really, really well. And one of the examples that I used for relentless execution is we were in a 2-hour daylight firefight in Adamia, and our engine block got shot out right in the middle, and we're in an urban environment, it's a 360-degree environment because, rooftops, windows, streets, cars, like it's a 360-degree shooting environment. Our engine block gets shot out, and we lose power. And what did we do as a team? We relentlessly executed. We had those tow straps hooked up, and we towed that vehicle. It was my vehicle. Actually, it was a lead vehicle that got the engine block shot out. And the trail vehicle hooked up the tow straps. We towed it back to base. We swapped out the vehicle. We got a brand new truck, and then we came back to the firefight to help our brothers from the 101st. Like, that's relentless execution. And you have to be able to do that when when the time comes, because, spoiler alert, there was no AAA roadside assistance in Baghdad in 2006. It was way too dangerous. But that I would say, execution is really important. But if I really had to, like, when I talk to high school kids, I usually tell them something like this. So I can't really answer it with one. It's kind of three. And it plays off the grit code. But when I talk to the younger folks, I said, hey, I'm going to tell you something so basic, so simple, so easy, you're going to laugh at me. But if you do this, you're going to be better than 99% of your peers, because it's really hard to do consistently. And it's like, you can just tell they're like, okay, what's he getting ready to tell me? It's like, there's 3 things: work hard, be humble, don't quit. If you can do those 3 things, you're going to be better than 99% of your peers, and you're going to have a lot of success in your life. Work hard, be humble, don't quit. And those are all principles of the grit code. They're not called, like, work hard is actually possess an extreme work ethic. Be humble is eradicate arrogance. Don't quit is adopt a no surrender mindset. So they're all principles. They play into the grit code. So one, relentless execution is super important, but typically I go with 3 when I'm talking to the high school kids, because it's just a simple way, I think, for them to remember. But all of these principles are really important. And I think it's a great reference. People can go back to it and be like, man, I just got punched in the face, or things are going good, I'm successful, but I want to level up. What can I do to level up and get to the next level, get that next job promotion, get that next pay raise, get into an Ivy League school or whatever. I think the grit code is a they can use that as a good application as well.
That's incredible, Darrell. This show is built upon passing on good information, and unfortunately, not everybody hears or applies the good information. And we have a continued increase in the tragic suicide rates among service members, veterans, first responders, and a number of other communities. What message of hope would you have for somebody that's currently battling?
Yeah, and I think it kind of gets into what we talked about a little bit earlier, where we were kind of covering that a little bit, with put the alcohol to the side, put the pills to the side, talk to your partner, talk to your spouse, seek help. you know, um, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage for us to raise our hand and say, hey, I'm struggling. I need some help. Like, that's very courageous to do that. And this as well as I do, Danny. If I ran into you west of Ramadi and I heard you out there saying, I need help me, please. I'm dropping every single thing I can do because you're my brother. I don't even know you, but you're my brother. And I'm going to run to your aid and I'm going to help you. And I would probably sacrifice my life to do what I could to help you. But I know that you needed my help, or you call me on the radio, or I call you and I say, hey, I'm troops in contact and we're going to get overrun if we don't have assistance. Like, I need a QRF. I need a quick reactionary force here. You're going to drop everything that you're doing, Danny, and you're going to get there to my aid because I called you. I needed your help. I wanted your help. But once we get out of the military and we're civilians, we feel like we're still tough guys, and it's not cool, to say, hey, Danny, I'm struggling, man. I'm in Texas right now and I just drank a bottle of whiskey and took a bunch of pills. I need help. We don't do that to one another, but we did it for our whole entire career. We did it while we were in combat. We asked for help. We gave help. We would do anything to help our buddies, our brothers and sisters. So I wish we did that a little bit more as veterans. And I wish that we would reach out to one another a little bit more. I did my first book launch event down in San Antonio, Texas, last Wednesday, I believe it was. But I saw guys down there that I haven't seen in decades. And this book brought them out of the woodwork. And, one guy drove 4 hours to see me and some of the fellow dudes, from that time period. So I wish we could do that more. But if there's one piece of advice that I think is really valuable and is something that's helped me a lot, because, surprisingly, I do spend a lot of time on the treadmill. I walk a lot, and it's not like I'm, 170, 190 pounds anymore. I'm way past that. But I think what I'm doing, it helps my mental clarity and my mental abilities, just to get out there and to listen to some music and get some blood flowing. Like, that really helps me. That calms me down, and it just is like a safe space for me. And I wish maybe people would kind of turn to that a little bit more instead of trying to do the booze or the pills, or, like some guys, I'll talk about guys because it's easier for me. Guys are bad, like booze or pills or women, or, like, man, if they could just, focus on some fitness and get that endorphin rush from doing a 5-mile run or doing some marathons like you're doing, or some Tough Mudders or whatever, I think that is a good way to kind of deal with some of those things. That's just me. That's my personal opinion. And I do talk about this in the book, and it's part of the grit code. Is controlling what you can control, and you can control your health, you can control what your nutrition, you can get good sleep, get 8 hours of sleep, all of these things that we can control. We should exercise that.
That's absolutely right. And I love that you are walking on the treadmill, because that's a great place to be. a great place to start, especially if you haven't done things for a while. We got to get you added to our virtual walking group so you can be a part of the currently nearly 100 walkers that we have going on there on a regular basis from all around the world.
Yeah. We used to have these. I forgot what the app was, but my when I was a security consultant at Thornton Tomasetti, we had like these little walking apps, and I forgot the program, but you could compete with all the different offices, and we typically smoked a lot of people just because we had some serious walkers in our group. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, we'll have to invite you there, and occasionally we run a month-long walking challenge for people to get out
Oh, that'd
there.
be fun.
I think the most we had was nearly 300 miles because one of the people in the walking group is a postal delivery person, and so she had to walk about 14 miles a day just for her job.
Well, we had in our office in DC, the person that always won was a remote worker that had a treadmill desk,
Ah,
and you can't you I mean, you just couldn't compete with that dude, man, because he's working 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours a day, and he's flipping on a treadmill. Like, you can't beat that guy. You can't, even if you get 20,000 steps in a day, like, you're way under what that dude's doing.
heck yeah. Well, Darrell, I really appreciate having you on here. Where can people find and connect with you so they continue to learn and follow your journey?
Yeah, of course. I'm really active on LinkedIn. I guess I'm an old school dinosaur kind of guy, but I'm primarily active on LinkedIn, and you could find me at DARRELL-UTT, which is really going to be easy for you. It's not a common name, so you'll be able to find me right away. And I typically post almost every single day. Apologies in advance because I'm posting a lot about the book now because I'm doing book promotion stuff. But I'm also on Instagram, and it's basically the same. It's DARRELL.UTT. And I'm a little bit sassier on Instagram. I have a little bit more sense of humor. Do some comedy type stuff on there, but I'm also doing a lot of book promotion. Um, but you can go to my Instagram, and then actually in my LinkedIn as well. And there's a link in like my header area where you can go, and if you want to get the book Grit to Glory and read about the grit code, learn about my journeys and some of my stories from Iraq, very entertaining stories. It's definitely a roller coaster, but you can find the link, and you can go to Ballast Books and get the book, or you can wait till December 3rd, and it's going to be available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Books a Million and all those other different places. So we're having a lot of success, and we're getting a lot of good feedback from the book, which makes me super, super happy. I'm very stoked. And I'm dying for feedback, so if there's any listeners out there that once they read the book and they want to send me a couple lines or give me a call and we can talk about it, I'm definitely interested to hear from like non-military, and I'm definitely interested to hear from females what they think about the book. I'm just kind of on pins and needles to figure out what they're going to say about it. So yeah, man.
I'm super excited. Leanne just pointed at me. She goes, "I'll write him something."
She's a good woman. She's a good woman. Thank you.
She's an absolutely amazing woman. Proud to call her my wife and producer. And for her setting up this conversation that we were finally able to have, Darrell, thank you so much for joining me here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been just, you guys are a first class act. It's been professional, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And for our listeners, remember, you can also catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, ready for you on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.